Why this change? Is it because they studied the scriptures and said, well, there's no basis for that teaching and we want to proclaim the truth? No, that's not the case. It's just, again, they found themselves embarrassed with a teaching which no longer had any basis for acceptance by anyone.
You're not Googling now, but you will be.
Hey everyone, so there's this part of the new annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses, the 2024 annual meeting, that's been stuck in my head a little bit. It's a change to their doctrine, and as we all know, they like to change their doctrines, and when such changes happen, they happen at the annual meeting.
In recent years, the annual meeting has been an occasion where clarified understanding of Bible truths,
a new light,
has been announced and explained. Of course, it's not at every annual meeting that this takes place, but when Jehovah makes something known, often it's at the annual meeting where it is announced.
Because God uses the annual meeting as a sort of like a Comic-Con for Jehovah's Witnesses. It's where he does all the big new releases. And so Geoffrey Jackson announces this new doctrinal shift.
Suddenly, instantly, with suddenness. There are some sudden things.
At last year's annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses, the 2023 one, Geoffrey Jackson, for the first time ever probably, said something that I really agree with.
Let's be quite frank. Over the last few years, we've had a few changes with regard to the events that occurred during the Great Tribulation. And if you've been in the truth for a while, sometimes it's a bit hard to remember.
Was that what we used to believe, or is this what we believe now?
It is really hard to keep track of Jehovah's Witnesses' end-time prophecies, specifically as it relates to the Great Tribulation and the United Nations. There's lots of codes, like a puzzle box, if you will.
Puzzle box, his sacred secret.
You've got Gog of Magog, the scarlet-colored beast, Babylon the Great. And 1 year later, at this year's annual meeting, the 2024 one, Geoffrey Jackson releases yet another new change to this very narrow aspect of Jehovah's Witness end-time eschatology.
Now this means we have to adjust our understanding. Another change.
So in this video, we're going to go through these changes. Not because it's super important what Jehovah's Witnesses teach about the United Nations and the end of the world, but because the fact that they're changing things tells us something about the religion, tells us something about cults and how they work, and how Jehovah's Witnesses have worked for a really long time. So strap in, you're in for a wonderful ride.
When we say strap in, you're in for a wonderful ride.
Before we get into this, I did sort of bury the lead here. Brother Geoffrey Jackson has a new name, which is Brother Jeff.
The theme, don't be surprised by sudden changes. Brother Jeff, you have our attention.
So you might think it was just a mistake that he made, but no, when he gets back up on stage, when Brother Jeff ends his talk, Gage Flegel's like, "Thank you, Brother Jeff."
Thank you, Brother Jeff. You've given us much to think about.
So I probably am going to accidentally say Brother Jackson a lot, but I'm getting used to it, and just know that he does prefer to go by Brother Jeff. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the United Nations plays an important role in end-time prophecies. And without getting into it, it just makes no sense. The way that the Watchtower described all this doesn't make any sense. And I don't mean that from a snarky atheist point of view. I mean that from a snarky logic point of view. Here, last year in 2023, Brother Jeff gave a recap of what they believe about the Great Tribulation.
Let's look at this review. What event starts the Great Tribulation? The destruction of Babylon the Great. That will be the time when the political powers turn on the world empire of false religion, showing their disgust for this symbolic prostitute. This will lead to the destruction of all false religious organizations.
He talks about the world's political powers turning on Jehovah's Witnesses. That means the United Nations. All the pictures I was showing earlier, that's actually stuff that's currently on their website right now. It's their current canonical doctrine. It aligns with their book on the prophecies of Ezekiel. It's called Pure Worship to Jehovah Restored at Last. And in chapter 15, I will bring an end to your prostitution, ominous title. It talks about the world empire of false religion turning against Babylon the Great, which is all the religions in the world. And it says, why will the governments of this world make such a surprising move? Because God will put it into their hearts to carry out his thoughts. Now, this book is still on the website, but it actually contradicts this talk that Geoffrey Jackson's giving, so it'll be interesting to see if this stays up there. In this scenario, God is putting this idea into the hearts of the UN, and the thought is we should get rid of religion everywhere, all religions on Earth. And it's the UN who send all these tanks in the streets and the military against Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's where we were at a year ago. Now let's watch how Geoffrey Jackson is going to change this a little bit.
For God put it into their hearts to carry out his thought. Yes, to carry out their one thought by giving their kingdom to the wild beast until the words of God will have been accomplished. Now, what is this one thought? Well, up to now, we've said the one thought is their desire to turn on false religion. And we can understand that because the context is talking about the destruction of false religion. But you see, if you look back at that verse, what is the one thought? Now, this means we have to adjust our understanding, another change. What does it say? The one thought refers to the nations being willing to hand over power, their political power, to the scarlet-colored wild beast, the United Nations. Let me repeat it, because you're in shock now, and you need to write this down. Okay. The one thought refers to the nations being willing to hand over power to the United Nations. Now, why is that exciting?
Okay, so this is the thing that he's changing. The difference is now, instead of God putting this thought into the hearts of the leaders of the United Nations, Jehovah is putting this idea into the hearts of like the President of the United States and the King of the UK and the Prince of Canada or whatever they have there. And they all go to the United Nations and they're like, hey, we're going to hand over our power to you. Just do whatever you want.
Jehovah puts that one thought into the minds of the nations. Yes, they will empower the United Nations so that the United Nations will be in a position to take action against false religion.
He's doing this because it doesn't really seem conceivable that world conditions could possibly progress to such a point where every nation on Earth just agrees that religion doesn't need to exist anymore.
Well, the fact that nations will eventually turn on religion really isn't that surprising, is it? Gradually, we've seen that happening. And we say,
Yes, yeah, we see which way it's going.
but what about nations empowering the United Nations, handing over their personal political power so the United Nations has more power? It has teeth, as it were.
You can see this in recent world events. The United Nations saying that something needs to happen doesn't mean that that thing happens. And Geoffrey Jackson concedes this. He says, as it stands right now, the United Nations is sort of a toothless entity. Well, I think he says teethless, actually.
At the moment, it's like a toothless organization, isn't it?
So this is why they changed it, to get around this issue that regardless of whether or not God were to put this into the hearts of the United Nations wouldn't really be capable of carrying this out unless all the nations on Earth unanimously agreed to it. I made a video detailing this when the Russia invasion of Ukraine happened, because Watchtower also believes that Russia is an important player in end-time Bible prophecy. And I'm not saying that Geoffrey Jackson saw my video. Because, no, he didn't. Definitely didn't. But apparently, not just ex-Jehovah's Witnesses like myself noticed that there seems to be a real timeline and logic issue with the very notion of the United Nations being able to ban religion. I mean, it's not like we have a global functioning definition of what a religion even is, and that would be a pretty hard thing to define, famously. Well, doctrinal changes are really just excuses for the governing body to plug plot holes that they see in this leaky ship of an organization they have. A ship where they are the captains and all of the rest of the members just have to get down there in the lower decks and shovel the coal.
That's you and me. We are shoveling the coal.
And so Geoffrey Jackson does a very interesting thing. He says, aha, you think you've noticed a plot hole.
Aha, we know what you've been saying.
And so Geoffrey Jackson, in a really cynical, in my opinion, really gross way, decides to gaslight Jehovah's Witnesses and start making fun of how ridiculous their doctrine is.
Now, I know what you're all thinking. We know. Aha, we know what you've been saying. Now, for many years, what did we think? We thought, well, that number will go down and down and down and down. Now, I don't know about you, but me, when that report came out, just how many? How many partakers? And what were we thinking? And really, what are we thinking?
I mean, really?
That seems unbelievable. No nation does that.
He presents this as if it's something that all Jehovah's Witnesses understand to be silly. And can you believe that this is what we teach or used to teach? Because guess what? We're changing it.
And what were we thinking? Well, probably, maybe we didn't say it, but we were thinking, the number will go down, 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 and there'll be just a couple of old guys in a wheelchair who will get their reward. Well, I'm exaggerating, but that was sort of the feeling, wasn't it?
Well, it's very insulting because, of course, if he hadn't given this talk, then all of the people would have had to continue believing these ridiculous things. That very weirdly, most Jehovah's Witnesses still believe because, as I'm recording this, the full annual meeting hasn't been officially released on the website. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness sneaking a peek at this, I hate to tell you this, but behind your backs, your leaders are laughing at you for the things that you still believe because you haven't heard the updated teaching yet.
So for us to think,
Well, there's some new ones on the governing body. They don't look too old. Maybe we've got a little bit extra time.
no.
Now, here's how you know that Geoffrey Jackson is not a fan of the Alt-Worldly channel. I know a lot of people wonder if he's a fan, and I hate to tell you, I don't think he is, because one of my earlier videos is about how this teaching of God putting an idea into the hearts of people is really disturbing and totally undoes the idea of free will within the religion.
We have something of a paradox with witness theology here. So, Watchtower asserts that Jehovah is allowing Satan to rule this current system of things in order to prove that Satan's rule is inadequate and cannot bring true peace and security to mankind. However, they also contend that Satan will actually succeed in achieving worldwide peace and security, and it is only because Jehovah puts an idea in the hearts of world leaders that Satan fails. Basically, if this is a contest, it seemingly ends with God cheating.
Yeesh, if you think I talk slow now. But anyway, yeah, Brother Jeff's talk doesn't address this fundamental flaw at the heart of Jehovah's Witness theology. History is this contest between Satan and Jehovah, and it ends with God cheating, because he just puts this thought into the hearts of world leaders to carry out his will, which weirdly is to destroy his people, but just as a show, as a big trick.
We know that our loving God, Jehovah, will do things in a wonderful way.
Wonderful.
Yes, he does the unexpected, and he does it with style. He has to be humiliated walking around in front of Mordecai on a horse, wearing the king's clothes. That's style. Jehovah didn't have to do that, but when we look back on it, that really is style, isn't it? Yes, he has style. Now that's style. And then this is where it proves again Jehovah has style. Now, not only is that style, but it was practical.
So before we get into the wider ramifications of this, let's just acknowledge that this doesn't really solve the problem, right? Because clearly all the other religions worldwide are going to be really upset about this. And it's not like, it seems to me that at least for a long time, Jehovah's Witnesses are not going to be the only religion left standing. There's going to be a lot of holdout Catholics. I mean, I don't know if anybody watching the channel has noticed this, to use one of my favorite words, notice.
And they will rule, notice, what does it say? Notice there in verse 34. It's interesting to note that
There's a lot of religious zealots out there who are not Jehovah's Witnesses. And unlike Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of religious zealots are willing to be violent. So even if God, puts a magic thought into the hearts and brains of all the religious leaders and all of the political leaders of the world, is he also doing that to every single religious person whose religion isn't Jehovah's Witnesses? And if God has a button that can magically do that, can he do it now, please? This is something of a big shift rhetorically because Geoffrey Jackson here acknowledges that the United Nations is a toothless entity. That's really only a complaint that I have seen from ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, but I think it must be something that people within the religion have noticed. I mean, if you think about it, people in the writing committee and the teaching committee, their entire job is to have Jehovah's Witness doctrine make sense to people, and they're going to notice this stuff too, but they're just going to try to rationalize it with more JW beliefs, which of course is what Geoffrey Jackson is doing. And this isn't the first time that a common ex-JW talking point against Watchtower has just become Watchtower doctrine. Jehovah's Witnesses just did away with counting service time, right?
Our ministry involves much more than counting time.
No longer do Jehovah's Witnesses turn in reports where they count the amount of hours they did in the ministry. They just check a box that says that they did participate in the ministry, except pioneers who do still count their time, but let's not get bogged down in details here. Well, this has been a criticism since the advent of counting service time, and criticizing this doctrine in private with his friends was one of the main reasons that Ray Franz was disfellowshipped. Says Ray Franz in Crisis of Conscience, what were the supposedly sinister activities we engaged in? Simply this. We discussed the Bible as friends, and with friends of long standing. The night Renee came by our room, we had been attending a seminar for elders arranged by the Society. Side note, back then they called it the Society, like the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Now they would say the organization. We discussed his impressions, which were basically favorable. At one point in the conversation, however, he said, "It seems to me that we almost worship figures. Sometimes I wish we would do away completely with reports." By reports, he was referring to the system of having each witness turn in report slips each month, listing what witnessing activity was done, including hours spent, literature distributed, and so forth. So, reasoning from the scriptures to show why the field service report counting thing doesn't make any sense gets Ray Franz kicked out of Bethel in 1980, and a year later, he's disfellowshipped. Cut to 2023, and it was just made doctrine using those exact same scriptural principles.
An adjustment was made regarding the reporting of our time and activity in our preaching work. Instead of focusing on reports, we try to make good use of every opportunity to witness.
I think that tells us that there are people in Bethel who think critically about the doctrine and know that certain things aren't necessarily true. I always think of this interview with Howie Rutledge Tran, a really great ex-JW voice, and he did a really great interview on a channel that I'm a huge fan of, the Lloyd Evans channel. Howie used to be a Bethelite and had very close association with the governing body because he was a personal assistant to one of the members. And he worked with a lot of higher-ups that, like, Jehovah's Witnesses would have heard of these people. And he tells this story that, much like this stupid talk by Geoffrey Jackson will always stick in my head.
At this time, Harry Paloyan was my table head, and he's a senior writer at Bethel as well. He's actually Bethel's only Harvard graduate writer.
Really? Right.
Yeah. So he used to work for the Wall Street Journal and converted to the Witnesses, and then was called immediately into Bethel. Because, you know, Bethel likes anyone with a prestigious education to come right to Brooklyn. So I wanted to ask him about 607, because he was the only one that I could imagine that might be able to reassure me that, you know, oh yeah, they're crazy. Those historians are crazy. It's a load of...
It's a conspiracy.
Yeah, it's Satan. It's Satan, you know, like the Witnesses used to believe Satan planted the dinosaur bones, and now Satan is planting, you know, archaeological evidence. So in a roundabout way, I asked Harry, I said, in one of our morning conversations, I said to him, you know, someone wrote in a letter to Carl Klein, and I read it to him, and it talked about 607 BCE and all this historical information. I said, isn't that crazy that someone would write that? I mean, it boggles my mind. How could it not be right?
Yeah.
And he got serious, and he looked at me, and he said, well, Howie, he said, you know, we shouldn't let things like this surprise us too much. He said, because really we don't know everything that we know is right. He said, this is the truth. There is no other organization that has the truth. But we know that prophecies change. Our understanding changes. And it was then he elaborated to me that even though it may not be true,
it's the
100% true. He didn't come out and say,
yeah.
But he said that some things, you know, we need to go along with for the time being.
I got caught up watching this interview. It's really great. Howie Rutledge Tran has so many great Bethel stories. Howie talks a little bit more about Harry Paloyan, this guy in the writing department who Howie had asked about 607. And Harry gives a very interesting interpretation of why Jehovah's Witness leadership is so focused on Bible prophecy in the first place.
That just makes me wonder how many people are like him
Yes.
At this moment in Bethel,
In
not
Bethel.
agreeing with things, but just kind of going along with it.
And you know, he didn't agree with a lot of things.
Yeah.
And he would be vocal, but here's someone that actually worked at writing, worked in the writing
Who
department
was
as a senior writer.
responsible for disseminating the official
He
party
wrote.
lines. Yeah.
He said he saw. He said to me, he says, when it comes to prophecy, he said, for one thing, there's this idea that the friends need something to help them keep mentally occupied. That's about in a roundabout way that he said.
Keep them busy.
Keep them busy.
I think Harry was onto something there.
The one thought refers to the nations being willing to hand over power, their political power, to the scarlet-colored wild beast, the United Nations. Let me repeat it, because you're in shock now, and you need to write this down. Okay.
In one of the few video interviews with Ray Franz, he says that nothing in the organization ever really changes. They just change the window dressing.
The changes that have come have been what we call cosmetic changes, and the structure remains the same. So these changes are like you put new curtains up or something like that, but the house is still the same house. It still has the same foundation. And if you read the publications in the magazine that come out, you'll see that nothing really has changed. It's the same thing.
I would agree. This tiny shift in prophecy that just narrowly kinda solves a plot hole for a half a second, it doesn't really change the fundamental nature of the religion. It doesn't change the fundamentally ridiculous thing that the United Nations was somehow predicted by the Bible. And much more than that, the United Nations would specifically target Jehovah's Witnesses, who will become in a scenario so preposterous that it can only be explained by God putting the thought to do this ridiculous thing into the very hearts of man.
That seems unbelievable. No nation does that.
They will target Jehovah's Witnesses because they'll be a repressed minority, and then the witnesses will be saved by angels in heaven. Oh, and they'll kill the SWAT teams. Stay tuned for my next video on bloodlust and doomsday prophecies. So he changed this thing, but, it doesn't really matter what it's changed to. The thing that's interesting about it is that they changed it at all. The reason why I like deconstructing this stuff isn't because it's, important what their UN teaching is. It's because the fact that they change it and go to these ridiculous lengths to justify it sort of underscores the fact that this is not the truth. This is a conspiracy theory detached from reality, built on narcissism. The word narcissism gets thrown around a lot these days, but Geoffrey Jackson, he thinks that he's one of 144,000 people ever who will get to go to heaven, and he'll get to fight in this cool angel army and take part in killing the SWAT people. I'm not a clinician, but that's a narcissism. It's brain rot, at the very least. It takes a certain level of delusion to get up on a stage and say these things with not just confidence, but laughing at your victims who just believed the thing that you're making fun of. I know I keep saying the same thing over and over. I can't get over it. I cursed and I'm going to cut it out because I just showed Ray Franz earlier. Now it kind of feels like he's here. He actually is, because he's literally on the pause screen as I'm recording this insert. Feels like I gotta be on my best behavior. I think Ray was able to leave because he was not a narcissist. Or at least if he was, he channeled it in a much more healthy direction. At the very least, he seemed motivated by a sincere love for the Bible, and he described his experience joining the governing body as disillusioning.
I must say that it was one of the most disillusioning experiences of my life. It came as a rude awakening to me to see what actually went on.
That's clearly not the experience that everybody else in this governing body is having. They seem like they're having a pretty good time up there. Ray Franz said he felt embarrassed about saying this kind of crazy stuff. And more than just saying crazy stuff, perpetuating genuinely harmful things.
I think the evil needs to be seen for what it is. It's this concept, this organizational concept, that the organization is everything. You see, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that this organization is God's one channel, that all of God's direction for people on the earth comes through this channel. And the men on the governing body believe it. I believed it. And that's the reason I was party to some things in the past that today I feel shame to think that I even had part in them.
I guess I'm talking about this because, this is all so crazy, right? We can just zoom out a little bit and admit that it's really weird that this religion that I was a part of, 4 years ago, believed this stuff. And, in real time as I'm editing this, I'm kind of trying to figure out what to make of the fact that I believed this in some sense. And it is built on this guy's narcissism. I mean, the whole group, the governing body, is narcissism. This is main character syndrome times a billion. Or actually, more realistically, times 8.5 million. And so teachings like this are really dangerous because they're not just silly, they create magical thinking and cause 8.5 million more people to think that they are the most important thing in the world, and don't they know that I am, actually. Speaking of narcissism, this talk actually contradicts something that Gage Flegel said 5 months ago. Oops, it's future Jake popping in during the editing process. So I thought that the Gage Flegel talk a few months ago at the convention was implying that it was Jesus who would put this thought into the hearts of men to destroy false religion, Babylon the Great.
Babylon views herself as a powerful queen who will never be brought down, and yet a terrible destruction is coming, and it will envelop her suddenly, as if in one day. What role does Jesus play in this event? Look again at verses 1 and 2. Who announces the fall of Babylon? An angel whose glory lights up the whole earth. To whom has Jehovah given such glory? To our Lord Jesus.
But he doesn't say that. He said that Jesus, King Jesus in heaven, is going to announce that false religion, Babylon the Great, has fallen, is falling, is about to fall. So yeah, this is now just fully a tangent because I'm not even sure this really does contradict Jeffrey Jackson's talk. Sorry, Brother Jeff. But Gage Flegel's talk definitely contradicts itself.
I am coming quickly.
Flegel starts out his talk by saying that Jesus Christ is going to be the one to announce that false religion is coming to an end. It's very appropriate that he will do this in the future.
A terrible destruction is coming, and it will envelop her suddenly, as if in one day. What role does Jesus play in this event? Who announces the fall of Babylon?
And then in his recap of everything he taught throughout this hour-long thing, he says that Jesus has already done this, that he has done this.
The angel tells John that these things must shortly take place. Today's world presents many problems, but Jesus will solve them all. He's announced that false religion will soon end. He'll defeat the rest of this system of things at the War of Armageddon.
So I really don't know what's happening here at all. Like, Gage Flegel sets up his conclusion by saying, Jesus will solve all our problems. He's already done this thing, and he's gonna do these other things. But then earlier, it's like he said that the Jesus announcing Babylon thing hadn't happened yet. So I need some help with this one, chat. But I defy you to sit down and watch this thing from beginning to end and tell me that there's a very clear interpretation of what he's saying Jesus is going to announce and when. I don't know. I don't think it's that clear. But I'm also tired because I've been talking about this video for too long. I'm going to close out this video with one more Ray Franz quote. It seems apropos given the flip-floppery at hand here. These governing body members clearly don't agree because they just kicked out one who seemed to at least disagree with something. We don't know what happened to Tony Morris. But what happened to Tony Morris hadn't really happened since Ray Franz. And ever since he got kicked out, all this crazy stuff has been happening, all these changes.
Let's review some of the recent changes we've had. What changes have we seen with regard to our understanding of Bible teachings? At the 2021 annual meeting, we received an adjusted understanding. Then at the annual meeting in 2023, we gained enhanced insight. At the same annual meeting, we adjusted our views. Also at that annual meeting, an adjustment was made. Then we received the 2024 Governing Body Update, number 2. In that update, we saw the need to adjust. What other major adjustments have we recently seen in our preaching work? The emphasis now, were you surprised by these adjustments? Perhaps so.
That's kind of what Crisis of Conscience is all about, this big shuffle in the governing body, which ends up turning into a bit of a witch hunt for people who are starting to question things like the 144,000 teaching. I had not the slightest doubt, however, that many others among Jehovah's Witnesses had a number of the same concerns that I did. For my years in the governing body, I saw no evidence that those concerns would be frankly faced or given the consideration they merited by means of careful, thorough research of the scriptures, and decided not on the basis of traditional views long held, but on the basis of the biblical proof or lack of it. The evidence pointed instead to the conclusion that any open discussion of these difficulties was viewed as a great danger to the organization, as disloyal to its interests. Unity, actually uniformity, was apparently counted more important than truth. Questions about the organizational teachings could be discussed within the inner circle of the governing body, but nowhere else. No matter how heated the debate on an issue within the inner circle, the body must present a face of unanimity toward all those on the outside, even though such face actually masked serious disagreement on the point in question.
Brother Lett always has something interesting to tell us. No pressure, Steve.
I guess what I'm saying is, Anthony Morris, please write a book. Even if you still believe it's the truth, just write it in a diary and just let us see what happened. This is history, Tony. Help us out. There's a power struggle playing out in front of our eyes, folks. It's like real life Succession. Except nobody really cares about this but me. I want to know the juicy details. I need to know the gossip. Tony, if this is history, help us out. Tell us what's going on. I'm making a new pivot. I'm going to try to be really nice to Anthony Morris. I'm going to try and get him to be my best friend. Seeing how much they've been contradicting themselves lately and just all the bizarre semantics and parlor games happening behind the scenes, I just want to know. It's really devastating to me that we don't have a really solid history of the organization from basically the time of Ray Franz's passing, or I guess really since 1983 on to now. So, if you were a Bethelite, if you have stories, if you know these people, and you can prove it, and you're not like a weirdo who's lying for clout, good, now that I made that caveat, that won't happen. But seriously, if you know anything, if you're PMO, I just want to know this stuff. I won't even display it on the channel, I just want to write it down for posterity. I just think we need to have this history. I know I'm a filthy apostate, but I mean, you know, if you watch this far, that doesn't actually mean what Watchtower says it means. It just means I disagree. I really care about this stuff. I really find it interesting. I want to know. We need the modern history. We need to know what the hell's going on right now. My email's in the description. I need to see receipts, but I want to start figuring this stuff out. Thanks so much to my patrons who help me live my life and pursue my dreams. That's a fun thing we get to do when we leave Jehovah's Witnesses. And, you know, you should aim low with your dreams, kids.
I mean, that's why I think of Geoffrey Jackson as Rutherford. Because I feel like they're both very snake-like in their approach to things. And they're more 100%. They're more interested in the appearance of the organization. Mark Sanderson, I think, probably is probably Geoffrey Jackson's right-hand man.
I totally agree. I mean, they're even dressing alike and grooming their heads and face shapes alike.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's like when a married couple starts looking like each other.
I know. It's happening to us. Oh, no.
At least we're better looking.
Hey.